This is the Future of Finance.
This episode is brought to you by Metis Global Partners and by the Intentional Endowment Network's 2025 Annual Forum, taking place October 27th and 28th at Goucher College in Baltimore, Maryland. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future of Finance podcast. I'm George Dyer, and today I'm joined by Mitch Thomashow, who is an author, a longtime educator in environmental studies, and the former president of Unity College. He's also consulted with over 100 colleges and universities on various aspects of their sustainability strategies as it relates to education, research, campus operations, and community engagement. Mitch focuses on some of the themes from his most recent book, which is called To Know the World, A New Vision for Environmental Learning, and how some of these big picture sustainability concepts and strategies for environmental learning relate to endowment investing. I've known Mitch for a long time. He's been a great mentor, and his leadership and approach have always been really inspirational to me. As you'll see in the conversation, he's a brilliant guy with a great demeanor, and it's just really great to catch up with him and hear about his latest work and his thoughts on where the sustainability movement is today. So I hope you enjoy the conversation, and please follow the show if you haven't already. And now, here's Mitch. Mitch, welcome to the podcast. So good to see you. How have you been?
I've just been great. I'm enjoying life. The state of the world presents constant challenges, but out here in the hills of New Hampshire, I'm enjoying things.
Excellent. Well, that's a great place to be. Well, it's so good to see you. It's been way too long, but I'm excited to catch up and share your work with our listeners. Yeah. So why don't we just start there to give people a little context? I mean, we first connected when you were the president of Unity College. So maybe just tell us a little bit about, your journey, kind of what brought you to higher ed and the work you did there and what you've been up to since.
Well, I've spent most of my career at Antioch, New England Graduate School. I was the chair of the department roughly from 1975 until 2005. It was about a 30-year stretch. And, my generation, those of us really between 65 and 85, built the field. When I was an undergraduate at NYU in the late 60s, there was no environmental studies anywhere. There were schools of forestry, maybe a few ecology programs here and there, but nothing. The interdisciplinary environmental studies that we take for granted now, let alone sustainability, just did not exist, at least in academic situations. So most of my career was building programs. And again, many of the people in my generation who were engaged in environmental studies built programs. And so that's what I did at Antioch for 30 years. We had a wonderful suite of master's and a PhD program. Then I was recruited to be the president of Unity College, and I took that on because it was an amazing opportunity to really transform a campus. And the particular challenge that was so interesting for Unity was that it was so resource poor. So I wanted to prove that, in fact, you didn't have to have money to do sustainability. If you were creative and if you got a whole institution behind you and everyone believing in it, there were all kinds of things that you can do. So that was pretty much what I did from 2006 to 2011, wrote a book about it called The 9 Elements of the Sustainable Campus. Then I worked, as you know, with the ACU PCC, American College University President's Climate Commitment. Tony brought me on.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that work. We had a presidential fellows program. I worked with the steering committee. It was so nourishing and inspiring to work with so many great presidents. And it also gave me the opportunity to visit many campuses. So between 2011 and really up till COVID, I probably visited over 100 campuses in one capacity or another. Helping with, it could be sustainability, environmental studies, speaking, a wide variety of things. And I continue to do some of that, not to that extent, but there are a few institutions that I work with regularly. The most interesting of which right now is Catawba College. We may have an opportunity to talk about that a little more later in North Carolina. And that's what I've done. I've been writing some. And it's interesting at this age, somewhat beyond the scope perhaps of this, but I think worth describing and discussing. I find it's really important to balance the relationship between aspirations and just being. And I think if you just focus on aspirations, you're losing an important part of life and contemplation and thinking about the meaning of things. And if you're only doing that, then there's a gap as well, because I think we all have a we all have a responsibility to give back. So, that's where I am. I'm trying to balance those two things and live in a world of aspiration, but also live in a world of just being.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and those were fun days. For those who don't know, the president's climate commitment was run by Second Nature, and I was working there when you mentioned Tony Cortese, who started Second Nature and got the president's climate commitment going. But yeah, that was fantastic and really impactful work, and you were such a champion of it through those years. It was a pleasure to see you in action. And yeah, maybe come back to some of that, but tell us a little bit more about your writing too, because I mean, you've really contributed so much to the field in that way. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've written 4 books on these topics, including you mentioned the 9 elements of the sustainable campus, but ecological identity, bringing the biosphere home, and your most recent one, To Know the World, which we'll talk about. But tell us a little bit about like what are some of the kind of through lines of those books and your thinking. And yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, as you've moved through and gone further in your career and life, like how have things evolved? Has your thinking evolved around these big topics?
The 3 of the 4 books, Ecological Identity, Bring the Biosphere Home, and To Know the World, are really a trilogy of sorts. And the underlying theme is how we think about human-nature relationships and how that impacts all aspects of everything we do. And in the case of Ecological Identity, my first book, which is actually my best-known book, that came out in '95, I was I, I worked with so many environmental studies students over the years that I was fascinated by who they were and why they chose the field. And when they chose the field, how to change the way they thought about not only human nature relationships, but also politics, spirituality, and education. And the word I came up for to describe this was, it struck me that it was an identity change, an identity focus. So hence the book's title, Ecological Identity. What does it mean when you identify with nature? And what's the significance of that? And a lot of the work was oriented around uh, some of the activities that I would often give students to do, ranging from sense of place maps, which I used for years and years and years, where people would do some type of representation of the places where they've lived and why they mattered to them, and other projects of that sort as well. In the second book, Bring the Biosphere Home, I was very challenged by the question of how do we learn to perceive global environmental change, because it was so clear to me that it was hard to do. And if it was hard for me to do, then it must be really hard for people who don't pay super close attention to these things. And so the basic theme there was that the best way to understand spatial and temporal change over historical time, geological time, was by getting engaged in local natural history. That without that knowledge, so that if you're engaged in local natural history, then you know that there's a Phoebe that may come back and nest in the same place on your garage every year, that there are certain cycles and rhythms, and you begin to look more closely at that, and you realize that your place is connected in space and time to other places. So there was a whole book written. I wrote a whole book about various ways you begin to get at some of those relationships by looking closely at the place where you live. And I also got into some of the existential challenges in thinking about global environmental change, questions of meaning and purpose. So that book came out, oh gosh, in the early 2000s. What I'm most proud of with both books, really, but certainly that one, is you could open it up today and wouldn't be the slightest bit dated. Yeah. And then To Know the World, and I'll mention the 9 elements of the sustainable campus in a moment. To Know the World, which came out in 2020, it occurred to me that there was a whole new generation of people doing environmental studies now. And I thought that environmental studies has always been most successful when it was on the innovative edge of curriculum. And I felt that to a certain extent, once the field became statured, as it had, it lost its innovative edge.
Mm-hmm.
And I so I wanted to ask the question, what is the innovative edge of environmental studies now? And that's what that book essentially is about. So I discussed many different themes related to that. Um, and one of the underlying foundations of the book is that for many years, people who were in the environmental studies field and the sustainability field, I mean, broadly conceived, assume that a better understanding of human nature relationships, ecological relationships was all you needed, but it became clear that no, to really understand these questions of distribution of wealth, which, the short term for that is equity, issues of tribes and tribalism, the short term for that is race, really, and understand issues of how we make decisions, the short term for that is democracy. You had to, all of these things tied together. You couldn't do one without the other. If you were interested in issues of equity, you really needed to understand questions of ecology as well, and vice versa. You can't really study human nature relationships without investigating these other things. So that was one critical theme that I tried to give names to. And then there were other ideas. I'm really interested in the relationship between ecological and social networks. There's a chapter called Constructive Connectivity. And to me, it's astonishing that more education is not devoted to helping learners understand information networks, how easily they are manipulated, and how to master them and how to control them for your own purposes, as learning tools, as opposed to being preyed upon by them. So there's a lot to think about there. And I discussed that I'm real interested in the template of ecological networks. As I look out my window right now, there's a substrate of mycelium that Paul Stamets, the mushroom dude, describes as the original internet. And there's remarkable connectivity that goes on all the time. And as we tap into that, we begin to see some parallels between that and how we think about social networks. In fact, I developed a whole bunch of activities and exercises for institutions that wanted to better understand how they network and how they can, where they are as an institution, where they're located, and how they can do better at being located where they would like to be. So there's other things I cover as well. I've been very, very concerned for a long time about the issue of ecological and cultural migration, a chapter called The Arrival and Departure of Species. And what's the relationship between how we think about ecological borders and political borders, for example. And that's usually not part of the conversation, but it's crucial that it is. I mean, if you look from a biosphere perspective, everything moves all the time. Continents move. For evolutionary adaptation purposes, species are constantly on the move. So how is it that we put up walls that separate people from moving from one place to another? I'm not saying that there shouldn't be borders, but there needs to be an ecological and cultural understanding of what these things mean. So I cover a lot of what I think was new ground for environmental learning. And I use the term environmental learning because I think environmental education has been stereotyped in a way, and in its being stereotyped, it's been diminished. So I tried to broaden it to include environmental learning. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about in that book. 9 Elements of a Sustainable Campus was a strategic orientation for institutions that really wanted to tackle the question holistically. Sustainability is not just renewables, it's how your whole organization thinks about human nature relationships and where things come from and where they go to, and what's the role of your campus as a leader, both educationally and financially, in moving some of these ideas forward. So that's what that book is. It's not really part of the trilogy so much, but certainly crucial to my work. And there have been other projects as well. I wrote a little book called Pacific Northwest Changemakers, where I profiled 8 different multicultural, multi-generational organizations in the Pacific Northwest that were making huge changes in their community in ways that were not inherently political. They were able to move through the stereotype of polarization to accomplish really good things. And I have a project now I've been working on. It's called Memory, very different. It's called Memory and Wonder. And the idea of the project is, how do we use memories of great learning experiences we've had as a way to extend awareness in the present moment? And the first volume is on play, games, and sports.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, it's a lot different than what I've been doing, but it's been a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I mean, there's so much to pick up on and unpack there. But I think, we've talked about, and people in sustainability talk a lot about systems thinking. And as you said, how all of these things are connected. And I think, it's tough for people to draw those connections sometimes. How, as you say, like migration on the human scale too interrelates with climate change and political dynamics and what that means for advancing sustainability or not. But yeah, I mean, that through line is consistent. And you talk about the place-based focus. Talk a little bit more about, how you think colleges and universities can use those concepts to put this into action when they're, driving environmental learning and delivering it for their students. And we talked a lot when we were working together at Second Nature about how the operations can be, like a role model for the education and research happening at these institutions. Now, as you know, we've been working with the Intentional Endowments Network to see how the investing fits into all of this. So yeah, on that institutional level, how do you think these schools can be or should be using their own campus and their investments to drive these concepts forward?
Um, it's a very challenging time for higher education for a variety of reasons that all of your listeners are well aware of. It's under scrutiny now in ways that are, I think, unprecedented. And that's on top of the financial problems that many institutions face.
Yeah, they're already facing demographic issues and shifts, and it was already challenging before the book.
It was already very difficult.
Yeah.
And for presidents, for many, the whole idea of a college presidency has changed remarkably over certainly since even I was president at Unity over the last 20 years. It's a very different kind of job than it once was. This president board role. So I'm saying all of this because we have to keep that context in mind. That for many institutions, not only have to deal with the scrutiny, but they have to deal with their basic survival over the short and medium and long term. That changes the conversation in many respects. Having said that, I was always very interested in the concept of investment and to see if we place an ecological framework on the concept of investment, how does it change the way we think about it? Because most of the time we think about investment purely in terms of money and financial capital. But what I did in the book, The 9 Elements of a Sustainable Campus, I hadn't looked at that in quite some time, but I reread that chapter this morning. As I break capital down into 4 different categories: social capital, intellectual capital, natural capital, and financial capital. And most institutions look at their assets purely in terms of financial capital. And they assess how wealthy they are based on that notion. And of course, that makes a lot of sense. We live in a society that measures wealth based on money and all the assets that can get turned into money. And college campuses are no different. An endowment is a kind of a crystallized version of that. Well, we have this amount of money invested here, 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 and here. We hope it becomes this over time through these agents, essentially, that use what we give them in various ways. So the brilliance of what you're doing and the brilliance of what, originally I think was, Tony Cortese and others came up with the idea that, well, we can put these endowments to good purpose and good work, and there's an educational imperative in how we think about it. So we all started thinking about investments very differently. I know for myself, even though I have, very modest investments personally, when I finished at Unity, I immediately started thinking about that for my own portfolio. Okay, how do we get out of this and how do we get into that? And what does this all mean? But anyway, getting back to a college campus, if we really break down its capital in those 4 formats, they're much wealthier than they think they are. So, for example, every college will assess its intellectual capital very highly. We hope it does. There's a lot of smart people and a lot of knowledge, and there's a lot of value in that is not always translated into money. If you look at social capital, you could make an argument that that's the very best reason to attend college on some level.
Yes.
The various connections you make with other students, with other faculty, with staff, and they last you for life, if done right. So colleges are rich when it comes to social capital. Some of that, by the way, begins to break down when you have online learning exclusively. That's a concern of mine. Maybe, something we can discuss at some point, but I think obviously there's some need for that, but social capital is not the same when it's just done online, as opposed to when people meet in person. And then natural capital, campuses typically are in places that are of great value in terms of their ecological services. So I think if a campus begins to think of its wealth on those terms, then it can ask some very fundamental questions about how are we utilizing this wealth. So, for example, if you ask the question of how do we utilize our natural capital as an educational institution, are we engaged with our community and thinking about the whole community and its natural capital? So that becomes an educational imperative for a campus. What I used to say when I was at Unity, and whenever I consult somewhere, I offer the idea that anyone who visits your campus is a student. It's not just the matriculated students who are paying tuition, but you could have a vendor who's coming to campus. You could have a parent who's coming to campus. It could be an alum who's visiting. It just could be a community member who walks through campus because it's a nice place to be. They're all learning when they go there. And do you take advantage of that possibility in terms of teaching about environment and sustainability, or don't you? And to me, it's a really important question for a lot of these campuses to ask. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in lead buildings of one kind or another, and you would never know because there's a little plaque that's buried somewhere in the corner. And unless someone points it out to you, you don't know, and you don't know what the features are, and you don't know what they've done. And this goes on and on. I mean, the number of campuses I've been to that are really interesting from an ecological point of view because they're migratory pathways, let's say, or the geology is interesting. Or there's a biodiversity of interest, biodiversity complex of interest. But there's no signage. There's no interpretive signage of any kind. You would never know any of these things. So I know I'm ranging widely in answer to your question, but I think we need to range widely if we think about the whole notion of investment and capital and education and what all of those things mean for a college campus.
Yeah, and I love that breakdown. I mean, we think about it a lot, or I think about it a lot in our work, particularly the social capital. I mean, there's a social capital you mentioned of the relationships, and that comes back to your constructive connectivity and network piece of your work. But also just the institutions themselves, the brands they hold, and, in the finance industry in particular, they're really desirable clients. A lot of asset managers look to have some endowments, as their investors, and that the credibility that gives and everything. So they have a lot of influence just beyond the amount of financial capital they have too, in terms of how the finance sector, I think, thinks about some of these issues. And then to your point about intellectual capital, we talk about it quite a bit and I think it's very underutilized, and investment teams are busy and everything, but they have so many resources right on campus around these topics often, just experts in academia around sustainable investing that don't necessarily connect with the endowment folks. So I think, there's a ton of opportunity, as you say, in all of that wealth.
Well, before you ask your next question, there's another factor as well, and that is that I thought about it a lot. I thought about this a lot when I was at Unity, almost 20 years ago already. And that is, but when I visit other campuses, and I visited 3 campuses in the last year: University of Cincinnati, University of San Diego, and Catawba College, all very, very different. But all these campuses are business incubators of one kind or another.
Yeah.
I mean, a decision that a campus makes, let's say, in terms of even the food it uses, and how it does waste and how it does renewables, can make or break a local business potentially.
Yeah.
So these campuses are almost always business incubators in one sense or another. And I think campuses that have MBAs, let's say, or other sustainability leadership programs of one kind or another ought to utilize that as they move forward. because that's the real world learning that is really crucial.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about it a lot with the president's climate commitment too, just sort of the power purchase agreements that a lot of those campuses made for what that impact that had of the renewable energy development of just that sector at the time, just really showed the demand. And at least we think about the same thing in the endowment side too, where there's demand for these things. Smart people in the asset management industry will figure out good ways to put them into practice, and that can have real impacts on the real economy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, what about, as this was launching, as we were kind of working together on the president's climate commitment right before we got the intentional endowments network going, I mean, a big part of the reason was the fossil fuel divestment movement that took off on so many campuses. And
Yes.
Unity was one of the first to um, make that move. I can't remember, was that just after you left or were you?
That was just after I left.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I thought. Um, but talk a little bit about, the sort of the experiential learning that things like that represent for students. I mean, I think so many students are just so much more aware of endowments and how they operate and everything because of the conversations that have been going on around this for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm. I think that's part of the broader question of what is virtuous activism?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's a great question for students to think about, because virtuous activism has to be scaled appropriately to um, what you want to accomplish, how much time you need to accomplish it, and what kind of legacy there's going to be to sustain that activism.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, there are many campuses where student groups generate most of the leadership around sustainability and change.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some campuses where it comes because the president drives it and then it catches on.
Mm-hmm.
But the pathway to change takes very different forms in different places.
Yeah.
So when the students generate the change, it can happen in lots of different ways. One way it's happened over the last decade is through a fossil fuel disinvestment.
Mm-hmm.
It's happened through anti-corporate activism and demonstrations. It's happened, most recently, it happened because of the Israeli penetration of Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that the reason why I talk about legacy is because so many things demand our attention that it's very easy for a particular issue to become the focus of all activism, and everything else slowly falls to the wayside.
Mm-hmm.
And you wonder how can you, to use that word again, how do you sustain forms of activism?
Mm-hmm.
What I like about sustainability activism, whether it's in relationship to more local food on campus, or more conservation on campus, or let's really think carefully about our endowment, is that can continue from one generation, from one class to the next class, to the next class, to the next class. But what's crucial is that student leaders work carefully with people who are first entering their system so that they can sustain that over time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it can be very robust under the right circumstances, under the right student leadership circumstances. Um, I don't even remember the original question, George, but I think this activism question is fraught with misunderstanding and disillusionment as well, because so often change takes place over different time scales, and the demonstration doesn't necessarily result in immediate change as much as people would like it to.
Yeah.
But the legacy does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We were just talking about the experiential education that the divestment movement or other types of activism represent. And I think it's true. I mean, it does. It's changed the conversation, whether, people are still debating the impact of divestment, whether it really shifts fossil fuel companies or the real economy or not. But I don't think there's any doubt it's shifted the conversation and gotten people thinking a lot more intentionally about investments and how they shape our world.
Yes, and one of the things people recognize is that purity is the end of possibility. To quote the great poet Jim Dodge. I mean, when you look really carefully at an investment portfolio, it's really hard to be pure.
Yeah.
It's, both vertical and horizontal integration of these companies. So what you do though, but that in and of itself is an amazing learning experience.
Yeah.
Some companies are better than others. And there are some that are more worthy than others. So how do you measure worthiness in regard to sustainable investing? It's an amazing curricular question, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's, I think we always like to oversimplify things as a society. And the truth is, as you're saying, we're in a system that's unsustainable. So any company in that system is going to, inherently have a role in that. And like you say, some are better than others. There's also like the direction of travel, that a lot of investors will look at. If there's a company has a big negative impact, but is actually really actively improving, is that a more sustainable investment than a company that has, less of an impact or less negative impact, but is fairly static? I think it raises a lot of interesting questions. And to me, it comes back to this whole notion of systems thinking. This episode is made possible by Metis Global Partners, a global equity solutions provider managing over $5 billion. Metis offers both active and customized beta strategies for institutional investors. Through their guided beta product suite, Metis provides custom passive equity solutions to clients desiring sustainably aligned equity and real asset portfolios combined with a high-touch partnership. Founded in 2013 in San Diego, California, Metis serves a wide range of institutional clients, including foundations, endowments, nonprofit, university, public plan, corporate, and family office clients. To learn more, visit www.metisgp.com. That's metisgp.com, or email info@metisgp.com. The Intentional Endowments Network's 2025 annual forum will take place on October 27th and 28th at Goucher College in Baltimore. This forum will convene 100 to 150 endowment, foundation, and sustainable investing industry leaders to discuss how to maintain intentional investing momentum at your institution, covering topics including system-level investing, the fiduciary duty case for sustainable investing, strong democracies and political risk, climate risk and opportunity, responsible technology and artificial intelligence, inequality as investment risk, and taking an expansive approach to talent. The program will be designed for endowment and foundation trustees, chief investment officers, and investment teams, as well as practitioners from investment consulting, outsourced CIO, and asset management firms. IEN events are intentionally designed to be highly interactive with plenty of time dedicated to dialogue at roundtables and networking, in addition to excellent presentations from experts and peer institutions. Go to intentionalendowments.org and click on Annual Forum to learn more. Would love to get your thoughts. I mean, there's so many great, just big picture concepts in your books. And how do you see some of those being applied for investors, whether it's current professional institutional investors or students who might want to go in this direction? Like, how important is environmental learning, and how do you see it potentially being applied, particularly when people are working in this old system that's unsustainable and sort of need to be successful in that system, and at the same time recognize longer term, there's real challenges there?
I think that the environmental field, and of course I include sustainability in that, has always had to teach its students and agents how to carve their own occupational niches. Because, I mean, think about the position of sustainability coordinator. Let's say in 1995, between 1995 and 2000, there were only a handful of those in the country. And then by the time I started at Unity in 2006, there were quite a few. And by now, I don't know if you have any numbers on this. I'm sure you might, or people at ASHE do, but I would say over half the colleges and universities in the country have sustainability coordinators of for managers or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
It could be located anywhere on campus, from facilities to the provost, to the president's office. But that was an occupational niche that didn't exist or barely existed in 1995. Mayor's offices have sustainability departments now that really make a difference in their cities. That's a new occupational niche. It did not exist prior to the 90s. Multinational corporations have sustainability coordinators that work on a range of things, from procurement to waste to supply chain linkages. So that's just one example. There are many, many other examples of professions that people have carved for themselves that represent making a difference and making change. For example, now, I think what I say all the time to an institution is, you can have an environmental studies or sustainability curriculum, but what differentiates your students from another institutions? And what would differentiate? I suggest all the time that they think about 8 to 12 credit modules in real skills-based approaches. For example, graphic design and illustration. So if you go to an organization and you have your environmental studies pedigree or sustainability pedigree, but you can do great looking graphic illustrations or web design or gaming. I mean, there's a long list, or social entrepreneurship. Then you're going to make a big difference. So I think the field, teaching in this field, has to accommodate some of these new ways of curating blogs, curating social media. I mean, the list goes on and on of skill-based orientations that are necessary to really move some of these ideas forward. And these things can happen. I've been thinking a lot lately about the idea of invisible resistance. And what I mean by that is, we know that we're living in a very challenging time where certain forms of public dissent are going to receive undue attention because they are threatening to the regime. And more people are treading carefully because they're intimidated by that prospect. And that's understandable. I mean, for some, don't care about that, and they will do what they're going to do anyway. But others are not so sure. But if you look at the history of challenging regimes, I'll put it that way without throwing labels onto it, at some point, something changes in the culture and they can no longer do what they're doing. And very often it's what I describe as an invisible resistance. People in associations, for example, people who are just getting together for community meals. There's a lot of different ways. I mean, you could make a long list of different ways that people get together, let's say on behalf of sustainability. And that's a very interesting type of resistance in a way, because it goes against the growth economy. It goes against affluence for the sake of affluence. It goes against the economic growth model, which, we all know the reasons why that's there, and, how it encourages certain forms of thinking. But those forms of thinking ought to be challenged. And sometimes you can do it with very basic questions like community well-being and community health and community food, all those sorts of things. It's a kind of invisible resistance. And I think colleges and universities could be well served by thinking about that. As on the one hand, we've got these demands for money, for these elite universities. There's probably a lot of things happening at elite universities that are just under the radar or don't capture the attention because they don't represent a blatant challenge to the status quo. They're just things that people do every day. And I think colleges and universities do a lot of that in ways that go beyond politics, that go beyond left and right, go beyond the stereotype of polarization.
Yeah, so they're communities and people, getting together and.
I don't know. Your question somehow drove me there because it's on everyone's mind.
Yeah.
And it's part of how campuses could be thinking about themselves.
Yeah. And I'm curious, I mean, that raises for me, we've been thinking a lot about, and it was in your book, and you're talking about networks, you talk about the railroads and sort of the like depth of change that they represented and new communication mediums, whether it's radio and these different types of networks and how much they shake society when they come to being and they're new and they change things so quickly. And obviously, with the internet and social media and AI and climate change, like we are going through this is the sustainability challenge, right? Like all these big disruptions and changes. And that's, a lot of these conversations have been about whether it's Trump or rise of authoritarianism in different parts of the world, or these kind of things that are happening as a result of this disruption also opens up the space to actually create these new and better systems. And I think, you mentioned sort of the limits to growth concept on a planet of 8 billion people and limited resources. And I think still a ton of opportunity for innovation and the growth of value, but the growth of physical throughputs, we need to change and address. And I guess, how much of that like environmental learning can influence how we think about new economic systems.
Well, a good place to start is in business schools, and with, MBA programs. And that's why I love the idea of the community incubation role of campuses. Um, I, you know, it, we do need a reform. I mean, we've had this discussion since 1980.
Yeah.
Starting with Herman Daly and state economics. And it's actually he had a predecessor guy named Walter Weisskopf who wrote a book called Alienation in Economics that talked about things like GNP fetishism. I mean, and then the entropy law and the economic process. I mean, there's a century-long tradition now in people who critique modern economic theory because it does not account for the natural world. And as you know, there's been a great deal of literature looking at ecosystem services and ecological economics, and it's become a field unto itself. All of these things are important. They're all necessary. They all are part of the formula for how we revitalize what we think about as environmental learning, for sure. And whenever they can be applied on a everyday campus experiential level, it makes a big difference, I think, in these lives. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's so interesting to kind of take it from the very big picture there back down to the individual. And I know you think and have written about this, just the importance, and you mentioned it earlier, like the importance of kind of starting with self and self-reflection, and that identity piece of like recognizing your place as part of nature, really, and what that means for how you operate in the world. I guess talk a little bit more about how you see that translating to policy, economic system theory, et cetera. And also how that helps you, you've been doing this work for a long time and it can often get people down. How has that helped you just kind of sustain your own work in this space?
Yeah, that's a question I look forward to responding to. And I also want to suggest that I think it is helpful for us to have a second part to that question, which is, what are the implications for how we think about investment? One of the things I've noticed is in the last few years, because I read a lot, and I'm very interested in natural history and how we think about the world we live in that regard. There's been, over the last 10 years, an incredible number of books that have come out that deal with the wisdom of various species and habitats. And for example, the numbers of books that have come out on mushrooms is remarkable. And implicit in all of that is that fungi have ways of being in the world, let me put it that way, because it's not even translatable, that represent a tremendous amount of ecological and evolutionary knowledge and survivability and adaptability. We ought to be tapping into that. I just look at my library. There's a book called The Light Eaters, which is all about plants and how they communicate and what they bring in terms of their ecological and evolutionary knowledge and adaptability. And it goes on and on and on. There's a wonderful book by Ed Young called An Immense World, where he looks at a wide variety of species on this planet and all the different perceptual capacities that they have. So, on the most basic example, let's say, is bees that see in ultraviolet.
Mm.
So I have a chapter in my book called Perceptual Reciprocity, the idea of, because I think that summarizes all of these things. What I mean by perceptual reciprocity is that I think every species, in fact, I think all habitats, and I say this reservedly, perceive. So when you take a walk somewhere, everything that lives knows that you're there.
Mm-hmm.
But you're so in your head, or you're so looking at your phone, you have no idea. But there's a reciprocity about perception that happens all the time. And that is, I mean, think about the incredible success of Robin Kimmerer's great book, Braiding Sweetgrass. Because what she does is she links in indigenous wisdom to this phenomenon of perceptual reciprocity in a way that's very readable and very feminine and very respectful of a wide variety of knowledge traditions in terms of how we think about the natural world. This is the biggest change that I've seen over the last 10 years in how we think about human nature relationships from a purely spiritual, psychological, cultural point of view. What are the implications for politics? Well, we hope that the implications for politics is that knowledge breeds more compassion for other species, for understanding, the importance of making space for a multitude of species and a multitude of different cultural peoples.
Yeah. And I would say like how our self-interest is reliant on all of that too, right? It's
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I find it very encouraging. I really enjoy reading these things because it certainly opens up my own awareness because I'm as trapped as anyone else and spending an hour in the morning on the internet, whether it's, check last night's baseball scores or read the papers or, however I distract myself. And then you suddenly come out of that. I write about that in the book as well, by the way. And you realize, my God, I've been catapulted into this really narrow view of the world, narrow framework where it's just opening portals on a screen. And that becomes the reality. And then you withdraw from a minute and kind of remember that you're a body on the planet. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we all face now in educational settings is there is an overwhelming momentum towards AI and electronic communication and information. I just, in the book, I have a chapter called Is the Anthropocene Blowing Your Mind? And I describe the Anthropocene as the convergence of natural resource extraction and the proliferation of electronic instrumentation and communication systems. You can't have one without the other. The two go hand in hand. And we see their culmination in AI, which, any discussion of AI has to think about the footprint. And that will be a huge new one. I mean, maybe you're already dealing with this, but yeah. When it comes to sustainability, when it comes to investment, when it's to campus footprints and all that kind of stuff, every Google search you do, and I do it, I mean, I don't want to sound hypocritical here, but every Google search you do has a huge footprint. And having a better, that's where the constructive connectivity comes in, by the way. If I do something on the computer, whether it's chains of information that lead around, what are the algorithms that funnel me into a specific way of doing things because the computer has figured out or the server has figured out or whatever entity it is has figured out that this user goes here and we can steer this user to these places so this user can buy these things. All that stuff needs to be part of how we think about education.
Yeah.
For environment and for sustainability.
It's another example of your sort of like, visualization of those networks, of whether it's social networks, but also just understanding that, like why these systems are driving us in certain ways and the impacts that they have. And we are doing, we have a new initiative actually just getting going around responsible tech and AI from that investment perspective, looking at the environmental impact of the data centers and everything, but also the social impacts, the addiction issues with social media and tech, privacy, surveillance, labor, workers, replacement of AI, like all these, a lot of social and environmental issues obviously tied up into it that are pretty fundamental.
I think that's so important for you guys.
Mhm.
It really is. It's going to be a huge issue. I mean, I saw one of the papers this morning had a piece that the biggest investment now of any in any sector is AI.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of money these companies are raising is absurd. It's unbelievable how much they're throwing into this. And it's just the pace of the sort of arms race that it represents is pretty wild. Well, we're
Yeah,
still all understanding the implications.
it is pretty out of control.
Mhm.
On another note, and I think this gets back to the whole question of investment. Um, and I want to point out, I want to mention a book as well that I think should be of interest to everyone. Well, two books actually,
Mhm.
but I see this work um, of community sustainability initiatives that are place-based, but also linked to global phenomena, what I call cosmopolitan bioregionalism. Um, I see them as refugia, and what I mean by that, during the Ice Age, there were communities that were able to survive despite the ice, and I don't. I think it's unrealistic to assume that we're going to be able to change the overwhelming tide of climate, biodiversity upheaval, species habitat fragmentation.
Mhm.
Uh, but there will be communities that have created the wherewithal through their practices, through their investments, to be able to show and demonstrate different ways of living for the future.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we're doing right now. I think that's what we're all doing. So a campus sustainability project is going to show us alternative ways of getting things done. A
Mhm.
food to a farm to cafeteria project shows us different ways of getting things done. Growing local food on campus shows us this. Using renewables in various and intriguing new ways shows us how to do these things. So we
Mhm.
have these practices. We have a catalog. We have a portfolio of sustainability practices that do guide us through. We're not going to be able to mitigate or adapt completely, but we
Mhm.
can in local places that can serve as exemplars. And I think that's another interesting way to think about investment as well.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it reminds me of that whole concept of like lifeboat communities that will kind of weather the storm and be these pockets that adapt and continue on. And yeah, I mean, as long-term investors, it's a really interesting thing to think about as we see sort of massive system change coming. What does that mean?
Yes, as long-term investors
Yeah.
and other companies that are thinking about this. We can, well, because of the absence of historical learning, very few people can actually go back 100 years and understand the various changes that have taken place. But you can't going 100 years into the future is absolutely inconceivable. I mean, we've completely lost our ability to focus on anything more than a 3 to 5 year time frame, maybe 10 years if we're extremely lucky.
Mhm.
Everything is so instant right now, and part of the teaching and the learning has to be to have a better fix on space and historical time.
Mhm.
And here are two books. I know we're going to be finishing very soon.
Mhm.
I've been reading this book, The Earth Transformed: An Untold History by Peter Frankopan.
Uh-huh.
It's an environmental history of the planet. Um, and when you read this, you realize that we're not the only culture that's faced this issue. It may be more pronounced, it may be more dramatic, but it, the cycle of scarcity and resources and uh, whether we conserve and how we conserve and the reasons why we don't
Mhm.
has extraordinary historical context.
Mhm.
And it helps to know that
Yeah.
because then we can see, oh, this culture adapted in this way and this one didn't. How does that help us think about our culture? So
Yeah. Because this is the big one,
it's
though.
out of our head of the instantaneous, immediate present.
Yeah. But it's the big one too about the first time at the planetary scale, right? So we better learn those lessons of the ones
Yeah.
that figured it out.
But planetary scale changes have happened. I mean, I didn't realize that there was a volcano in Alaska 300 years BC that affected food prices in Egypt.
Mhm.
So, there have been huge Earth system scale processes, especially volcanoes,
Yeah.
that have completely changed. I mean, caused plagues.
Hmm.
So it's very interesting and helpful to provide that historical perspective in terms of lessons learned or not learned. And then I have not, I've only dipped into this a little bit thus far, but there's another really interesting new book called Hope Dies Last by Alan Weissman, who's a journalist.
Mhm.
Wrote a book some years ago called The World Without Us, in which,
Oh, yeah.
right? Well, this book, what he does is he goes around the world and he interviews folks who are working on, I guess for a better concept, we can call them sustainability or environmental learning projects.
Mhm.
They're making a huge difference in their communities, and they're doing this work against all odds. So it's very helpful to know about these things because they show us what can be done in circumstances where you don't think anything can be done. So every educator needs to know about it. In fact, what I'm going to suggest the next time I, visit Catawba College, where I've been doing some work, is faculty might want to look at a book like this
Mhm.
and say, well, okay, what can we derive from that in terms of the skills that our students need?
Yeah.
What are the skills that we identify in these change agents who are doing these things under very challenging circumstances? And are those skills that we can teach at our college? That's one book by example. There may be many other examples of remarkable change agents exemplars that have done great things. And that should be the basis for curriculum. Okay, well, what are those skills? And do our students have those skills? And how do they modify them according to their own needs and interests and their own special talents?
Hmm. Yeah, I love
And
that idea.
that's where I think we need to be going. And that's an investment.
Yeah.
You know, that's an investment in the future of the campus. It's an investment in the students. It's a way of thinking about what we want from our institution and what we want from the people who graduate from our institution. It's a long-term future of skill development.
Yeah. And I think it's such an exciting way to educate students in a way that's positive, that can be more hopeful, that can help them drive innovation and get excited about, how to navigate the future and create the solutions as opposed to just being paralyzed by the fear of all the big threats we face around this stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
That's
I,
cool. We didn't get a chance to talk about Catawba College, but I do know, been in touch with Lee Ball there about the big gifts they've gotten and just all directed towards sustainability. And it's just so exciting, the potential that they've got there.
I'm really, yeah, I'll be going down there again for a few weeks this fall. It'll be my third visit, and um, they have a chance to it's very interesting school for many, many reasons. I mean, one is it's in a purple community.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that is really helpful because they need to do things there that um, are easily accessible
Mm-hmm.
to a wide variety of types of people.
Mm-hmm.
Second, it's a very diverse campus. And third, it's got a lot of first generation students.
Yeah.
So all of these things make it interesting. And it's unprecedented in the fact that they've gotten a lot of investment from, a remarkable donor.
Yeah.
And they have a mandate to become an exemplary sustainability environmental learning college. And it's an incredible case study. And how do you move forward to do that well and bring everyone along with you? And so I've really enjoyed my time there. People are fantastic, and I've learned a lot by being there. Um, and it'll be a lot of fun to see what they're doing. And I think Lee is great. He has a president label,
Mm-hmm.
which gives him a lot of access and quite a bit of leeway in terms of what he's able to do. But he understands the very close relationship between moving sustainability forward and moving curriculum forward and how hard it is to do.
Yeah.
Because I've described that place as on a bullet train when it comes to sustainability, change, and renewal.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they're moving along the tracks when it comes to curricular change, but I've never seen an institution where the curricular change could keep up with the sustainability.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I'm
It's really hard.
so glad to hear you're involved with that. That's exciting. I think it's a great.
Yeah, it's been really fun, and
Yeah.
there's some really great people there. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Nice. Well, Mitch, a few final questions, but this has been great to get your thoughts on all this and to catch up. But we like to do a few kind of fast, rapid fire questions at the end here. So what are you doing for fun these days?
I swim every day in the winter. Not every day in the winter, but we have a beautiful lake here, and I swim for 45 minutes. I bicycle almost every day for about 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a musician. I play piano, keyboards, and guitar, and I do some of that. I love to read, and I have a board game collection. I try to rope Cindy, my wife, into playing games with me as much as she'll do it. So all of those things are things that I love to do. And it's friends, and I have a bunch of colleagues that I meet with online once a month just to talk about life and ideas and everything else.
Nice. That's great. That community piece is huge. And yeah, do send Cindy my best. She's great. It's been way too long since I've seen her too. Nice. Well, how about you recommended a couple books already? I always ask a good resource or book, but those 2 books I think are solid. Any other pieces you think students should check out if they're interested in these topics?
Yeah, well, those are big books. They're really, really interesting. I just read a novel that I thought was amazing. It's called The Book of Records by a woman named Madeline Thien, Thien. And it's a surreal climate change future where people have left their home places because of flooding, and they gather on this island, and for some of them the island is a way station, and for others it becomes a semi-permanent residence. So it's a very interesting study of transience and permanence. But in telling that story, she also tells the story of 3 really interesting people. Hannah Arendt, the brilliant political philosopher who had to flee Nazi Germany under very challenging circumstances and has written some just remarkable books. Spinoza, who was a philosopher that was excommunicated from the Jewish community because of some of his views of how he envisioned God. And Tofu, who was an ancient Taoist poet who lived in a time of civil war and revolution. So she's telling the story of these 3 brilliant minds from different spaces and places and culture, and how they navigate pretty intense social and political change, and how their ideas resonate throughout all of that, and how they resonate into the present moment. So that's a really wonderful book. On a different note, I love this book, and it's not something that you sit down and read. It's called Habitats of the World.
Mm-hmm.
It's a field guide for birders, naturalists, and ecologists. And what this is it's a beautiful, beautiful summary of all the habitats on this planet. And it's just great. You just sit here and randomly open it up. And, here I am right now in the Madral sclerophyll forest and scrub on the west coast of Chile. Kind of read about it for a while. And the reason why I like it so much is it's just a reminder of what a beautiful planet this is and how much diversity there is, and why we should treasure it and value it so much. So, it's not something you'll sit down and read, but just flip through to remind yourself of why we do this work. I can go on, but those are a few of the highlights.
Those are great ones. Yeah, I can tell you got a lot of books around here. Phenomenal. Well, how about you've sort of touched on some of these, but if you had to pick one thing that you would wish that all college presidents would do right now in terms of sustainability, what would it be?
I think that the best thing that any leader of any institution can do is to spend time with the people that she or he leads, and to really understand what their needs are, what their motivations are, and how she or he can best serve those people. And so often leadership works in a bubble. But it doesn't think it's working in a bubble. And the old management, by walking around, really getting out there. So if you're the head of if you're president of a college or a university, no matter how small or how big, get out there and spend some time with students and find out what's on their minds and what they care about. Staff, faculty. I think that's really crucial, number one. Number two is to never forget that someone once told me this. When I left Antioch as the department chair and was getting ready to become a president, I went to see two different college presidents to ask them what was in store for me. One was Will Peterson, who was the president of Franklin Pierce at the time and had previously been governor of New Hampshire, a wonderful guy. He's now deceased. And another was a woman who I've lost touch with, a woman named Helen Giles G., who was the president, African-American woman who was the president of Keene State College. Mm-hmm. And I was asking them questions, advice, all that. And Helen said something to me that I never forgot. And that's what I would offer in return. Being a university president is the best chance you'll ever have to be an educator. Mm. And that's what I was most worried about when I started. What's going to happen to my role as an educator? But I think, the president, because they're so surrounded by business decisions and decisions related to logistics and unions and athletics and on and on and on and on and on, it's easy to forget that you're the educator in chief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So those are that. I offer that. Again, reservedly, given my relatively limited experience, but I have visited over 100 campuses over the years, and I think the most successful leaders, campus leaders, understand the importance of that direct contact one and the importance of their role as educators.
Yeah. I remember, that you gave me that advice 10 plus years ago around management. By walking around, that's definitely stuck with me. And as you were talking about virtual education, I was thinking about virtual work and how it's tougher to do that these days in a virtual organization, but there are ways. And the educator in chief thing, I think, resonates so much because, as you're saying, everyone who comes to campus or engages with campus's learning in some ways, enough presidents take every chance they can to just center sustainability in the purpose of education. I think they can have a huge impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, our kind of standard two final questions here. What is your vision for the future of finance, given your kind of perspectives on sustainability? How does finance need to be shaped if we're going to keep this going?
I don't think we're going to be able to change the global financial structure and the protocols that surround it. I just don't see that happening in the next 10 or 20 years, barring some type of cataclysmic collapse, which we hope doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. But I do think that regions and communities can rethink what they mean by finance and rethink what they mean by investment, mm-hmm. and begin to think more long-term about what we need for what is community health and what is community well-being. And how do we invest in those things as a means of building our social, intellectual, natural capital, and ultimately our financial capital as well? And as our community becomes a better place to live because we've done all of that, how do we then serve as a business incubator at the same time? And what's the relationship between all of these things? I think that's really possible. We've seen it happen in places. Mm-hmm. And that to me represents a vision for the future of local finance. And maybe you can have some impact in relationship on these global protocols.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. And then finally, how about for college students, young people interested in doing some of this work? What kind of advice would you give in this moment?
I think that to stay aware, stay active, stay engaged, to study, which sounds old-fashioned, but really spending time by yourself, reading and thinking and learning, or with others doing the same thing, mm-hmm. staying open-minded, exploring lots of different ideas and subjects and concepts, and making sure that you are engaged in communities of practice while you do all that, because the best learning always comes from your hands-on experience. And to think of the whole world as your classroom, not just the matriculated classes that you may be taking. But that's that's time honored. That's for any time, any place.
Yeah.
I stay. The best moments are when you attain a state of wonder about something, and look for those mentors and those experiences that can help generate a state of wonder for you.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Mitch, thank you again. So good to see you. And
Yes, it really is.
yeah, great to catch up.
Absolutely. Thank you for your great work too. I get the newsletter, and I'm really pleased to see all the things that you're doing. It's great.
No, well, thank you.
If I can ever be of any help or whatever, if you want to call me in to do something at a conference, whatever, just please do let me know.
I love it. Awesome. Will do. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye now, George. Thank you so much.
This episode has been brought to you by Metis Global Partners and by the Intentional Endowment Network's 2025 Annual Forum, taking place October 27th and 28th at Goucher College in Baltimore. Thanks for tuning in for the Future of Finance podcast. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And please take a moment to rate, review, or share the show. All of this really helps us to reach more people like you who care about creating a thriving and sustainable future. And it's a really easy way to have a big impact. So please do follow. A quick disclaimer, the content of this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Investments and strategies discussed may not be suitable for all listeners. Please consult a financial, legal, tax, or accounting professional before making any investment decisions. References to managers and funds are for informational purposes only and should not be considered endorsements or investment solicitations. This podcast does not monitor fund performance or guarantee the accuracy of third-party materials or statements. This has been an episode of the Future of Finance podcast, exploring how finance can shape a vibrant and sustainable future. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.